"If you can dance better than me, I'll give you $1 million. The arrogant declaration of Valentina Romano, the fiancée of New York's most powerful mafia boss, Alessandro Moretti, rang out across the luxurious grand hall filled with the city's wealthiest and most influential guests. Under the gaze of hundreds of watching eyes, Valentina suddenly pointed at Emma, the 3-year-old daughter of the housemaid, Sophia, and issued a challenge that made the entire ballroom burst into laughter. No one believed that a child in a simple, worn dress could possibly compete against a woman who had been professionally trained in dance for years. To everyone in the room, it was nothing more than a cruel piece of amusement meant to entertain the party. But when the music began to play, what little Emma did next left every single person present completely speechless. Stay with the story until the very end, because what happens next will be something you could never have imagined. The laughter had barely faded when Sophia felt her own heart slam against her ribs. She stood, pressed against the swinging kitchen door, one hand gripping the wood so tightly her knuckles had turned bloodless. Out on the marble floor, under the golden weight of 3 enormous chandeliers, her 3-year-old daughter stood alone. Emma looked so small, impossibly small. The cotton dress she wore had been washed too many times, the hem uneven where Sophia had let it down last spring. Around her, 300 of the most powerful people in New York held glasses of champagne and waited to be entertained. Some of them were still smiling, the kind of smile that had nothing warm behind it. Emma turned in a slow circle, searching the room, looking for the only face in it that mattered. Sophia moved before she knew she was moving. She crossed that endless stretch of marble on legs that did not feel like her own, and she knelt down in front of her daughter and gathered her close. Her hands were shaking as she smoothed the front of the little cotton dress, as she tucked a stray curl behind Emma's ear. She could smell the strawberry shampoo from the bath she had given her that morning in another life. "Listen to me, baby girl," she whispered, and her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. "Dance like we do at home. Dance like nobody is watching." Emma nodded once, very solemnly, the way she nodded when her mother told her important things. Then she sat down right there on the marble floor and pulled off her small shoes, one after the other, and placed them neatly beside her. She reached for the stuffed rabbit she had been holding and looked at it for a moment as if apologizing. She kissed it on its worn ear and set it carefully on the seat of the closest chair, where it slumped forward with its arms open, watching. Emma walked barefoot into the center of the ballroom. Near the tall window at the far end of the room, Alessandro Moretti went very still. In almost 2 years, he had passed the woman who now knelt at the edge of the dance floor 1,000 times without ever seeing her. He had never once looked at her child. He was looking now. The band began to play. It was a soft song, a piano and a single violin, nothing important. But when the first notes drifted out across the polished floor, the little girl closed her eyes, and then she began to move. There was no technique in it. There was no trained line to her small arms, no rehearsed placement to her feet. There was only a child who had learned, somewhere in the countless dim hours above a laundromat, that music was a thing you answered with your whole body. Her arms lifted toward the light as if she meant to gather the chandelier down into her hands. Her bare feet found the marble the way water finds the shape of a stone. She spun, and her curls lifted, and she laughed once without meaning to. The room forgot how to laugh at her. It happened in stages, the way weather changes. First, the smirks slid off faces. Then the champagne flutes lowered, one by one, back toward the tables. Then a woman near the front pressed her hand flat against her chest as if trying to keep something inside from getting out. There are moments, in the long, unbeautiful business of being alive, when something true walks into a room that was not expecting it. It does not knock. It does not announce itself. It simply arrives, small and barefoot, and every polished thing around it suddenly looks like glass. The last note faded. Emma opened her eyes, breathing softly, unsure why the room had gone so quiet. Then it broke. The applause did not build. It erupted. It came all at once, 300 pairs of hands clapping like thunder, and beneath it a sound Sophia had never heard in a room like this before. The soft, ragged sound of grown people trying not to cry in public. Valentina Romano had not moved. She stood exactly where she had been standing when she made her promise, her diamond ring catching the light on a hand that had forgotten to lower. The color had drained from her face. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She was still looking at the little barefoot girl in the middle of the floor when the first tear slipped down her cheek. The tear reached the corner of her mouth before Valentina remembered she was still holding a glass. She lowered the champagne slowly, as if setting down something that no longer belonged to her, and handed it without looking to a waiter who happened to be passing. The waiter took it. Nobody applauded anymore. The room had gone quiet again. Not in awe now, but in waiting. sensing that whatever came next would decide the shape of the evening. Sophia watched from where she still knelt near the edge of the floor. Every muscle in her body had gone rigid. She had prepared herself for anger. She had prepared herself for cruelty dressed up as amusement, for a woman who would not lose gracefully in front of 300 people who mattered to her. She had not prepared herself for what she saw instead. Valentina Romano's face was softening. It happened the way a photograph develops, slowly, feature by feature. The tight, camera-ready smile she had worn all evening slid off. The polished cool in her eyes cracked. Something underneath came through. Something Sophia had never suspected was there. A young woman who had once, perhaps, been small in a room too big for her, and had spent every year since making sure nobody would ever look at her that way again. Valentina took off her heels. She left them where she had been standing, 2 thin gold points on the marble, and walked barefoot across the ballroom floor toward the little girl in the cotton dress. The crowd parted for her without meaning to. When she reached Emma, she went down onto her knees, right there in her gold-embroidered gown, and she pulled the child into her arms and held her the way a person holds something she is only now realizing she almost broke. "You are the most beautiful dancer I have ever seen in my life," she whispered against Emma's hair, loud enough only for the child to hear. Then she pressed a kiss to the top of Emma's head, held her one moment longer, and stood. She faced the room. "I lost tonight," Valentina said, and her voice carried without any effort, the way voices carry when a person is finally telling the truth. "And I lost in the happiest way of my life." The ballroom broke into applause. "I made a promise in front of all of you," she went on, "and I intend to keep every single word of it. $1 million. To this little girl's mother, delivered before the end of the engagement ceremony tonight." The applause thundered. Near the tall window, Alessandro Moretti was looking at Sophia, really looking. In almost 2 years, he had walked past her 1,000 times as if she were part of the wallpaper, another polished surface in a house full of them. Now his eyes found her across the marble, and for the first time there was warmth in them, something that was almost an apology for every day he had failed to see. Marco Ricci moved without being told. A single lifted finger to the head waiter, a small nod toward the head table, and the room began to reset itself around a toast. Someone pressed a silver tray gently into Sophia's hands. "For the 3 of them," Marco said quietly at her ear. Miss Valentina asked. "She wants it to come from you." 3 glasses stood on the tray, 2 flutes of champagne, gold under the chandelier light, and in the middle, a smaller glass of apple juice, the color of amber honey, for Emma. Sophia carried them across the floor with her chin held higher than it had been in a very long time. She set the tray on the linen-covered table. The 3 glasses caught the light and threw it back in small trembling stars. She stepped back one careful pace, smiling through the wet on her face, and folded her hands in front of her apron. She had no way of knowing that this was the last quiet minute the night would ever give her. Alessandro rose from his chair and lifted his flute. Valentina, still barefoot in her gown, stepped to his side and took her own glass from the tray. Emma had been drawn forward by Sophia's gentle hand, and now stood between them, small and solemn, holding her cup of apple juice with both hands, the way children hold something precious. The ballroom fell into a hush. 300 people lifted 300 glasses in a slow, glittering wave. Valentina looked out across the room. She looked down at the little girl beside her. Then she raised her flute high enough that the light caught it and made a small sun of the pale gold inside. "To Emma," she said, "the brightest star in this room tonight." "To Emma," the crowd answered as one. The chandeliers threw 1,000 pieces of light across the marble. Valentina smiled, that new soft smile that had only started to belong to her an hour ago, and she brought the flute to her lips and took a single, unhurried sip. For one heartbeat, everything was perfect. For one heartbeat, the story that room would have told itself later was a beautiful one. A woman who had begun the evening cruel and ended it generous. A maid's child who had reminded 300 wealthy strangers what wonder felt like. A mafia boss who had looked at his housekeeper and finally seen a person. And then Valentina's face went still. It was not fear. It was not surprise. It was a slow, unnatural stillness, as if some inner mechanism had simply been switched off. Her lips parted around a word that did not come. Her hand, still holding the flute, began to tremble, and the tremble climbed her arm. And then all at once, her fingers opened, and the glass was falling. It struck the marble at Sophia's feet. The sound of it breaking was not loud. It was a small, bright, almost delicate sound, but it split the entire ballroom the way a rifle shot splits a forest. Valentina swayed, her knees folded. Alessandro caught her before she hit the floor. She was already convulsing, her back arching against his arm, her lips going the pale gray blue of stone. He shouted something that was not a word. A raw animal sound none of his men had ever heard him make in their lives, and then he found his voice again, and it came out as a roar. "Ambulance! Now!" The room shattered. Chairs fell backward as guests scrambled up. Somewhere a woman screamed. Somewhere else another woman was already sobbing. Security men in dark suits materialized from every wall of the room, one of them pressing the emergency line to his ear as he ran. Marco Ricci was suddenly at Alessandro's shoulder, hands steady, voice cutting through the chaos with orders none of the guests could hear. At Sophia's feet, the pieces of the broken flute scattered outward in a wide, uneven arc. One long shard rolled almost gently to the toe of her worn shoe and stopped there, spinning once, twice, before it lay still. It caught the chandelier light and threw it back in a small, trembling burst, a fallen splinter of star on the polished floor, glittering as if it did not yet understand what it had just witnessed. Emma had not moved. She stood exactly where the toast had left her, her stuffed rabbit crushed against her chest with both arms, her wide, dark eyes fixed on the woman who had knelt down in her gown to hold her only minutes before. She did not cry. She only watched, the way very small children watch things they do not yet have words for. Sophia moved. She crossed the 2 steps to her daughter in a single lunge and gathered Emma against her, one hand cupping the back of her head, turning her face away, shielding her body with her own. She whispered something too soft to be heard, something meant only for her child's ear, over and over. Behind them, in the far corner of the ballroom, near the tall drapes of dark red velvet that framed the service doors, a figure in a butler's black coat took one silent step backward, then another. The heavy fold of the velvet swallowed him without a sound. Nobody was looking. Everybody was looking at the woman in Alessandro Moretti's arms. The ambulance tore out of the estate gates at a speed the drivers of New York's finest black cars would never have dared. Its red lights spun outward across the night, sweeping over wrought iron fences and sleeping brownstones, over a doorman lighting a cigarette on Park Avenue, over the wet cobblestones of a side street where a delivery boy stopped his bike to watch it pass. Inside the cabin, everything moved at once, and nothing moved fast enough. Alessandro sat pressed against the wall beside the stretcher, both of his hands wrapped around one of Valentina's. Her fingers were cold. Her rings had already been cut off and dropped into a plastic tray somewhere near her feet. Her lips were the color of old bruises, and a fine tremor ran through her jaw at intervals of a few seconds, as if something inside her was trying to speak and no longer had the strength. A paramedic knelt across from him, jamming a fresh needle into the crook of her arm. "Epinephrine going in. Second dose. BP?" the other paramedic snapped, one hand on the cuff. 68/40. Dropping. "Get me a line to Mount Sinai. Tell them we are 3 minutes out. Possible ingestion. Unknown agent. Female. 30. No known allergies. Convulsions on scene. Cyanosis around the mouth. We need a tox team ready at the door." The words hit Alessandro like small stones. Ingestion. Unknown agent. He heard them, and he understood them. And beneath the understanding, a slow black fury began to open somewhere very deep inside his chest. Somebody had done this. Somebody had reached into his house tonight and poisoned the woman he had chosen to marry. Behind the ambulance, one headlight length back, Marco Ricci's black sedan carved through the same red-lit streets. His face in the dashboard glow was unreadable. His phone lay flat on the passenger seat, on speaker. Already halfway through a call he had begun the instant Valentina's flute had struck the marble. "No car leaves the grounds," he was saying, quiet, precise. "No guest, no waiter, no cook, no driver, nobody. Lock every gate. I want 2 men on every exit, and I want the security footage from the last 4 hours pulled and copied before anyone touches those servers. Am I clear?" The voice on the other end said, "Yes, sir," and hung up. Back inside the estate, 3 floors above the ballroom, Sophia was closing a bedroom door behind her. She had carried Emma up the servants' stairs with the child's face buried in her neck, past the frozen guests, and the men in dark suits and the silver tray still standing on the head table with 2 glasses left on it. She did not stop until she reached the small room she had been given for late shifts, and she locked the door behind them, and she sat down on the narrow bed, with her daughter still folded against her chest. Emma was crying now, quietly, the way she cried when she was more confused than hurt. "Mama, is the beautiful lady okay?" Her small voice was muffled against Sophia's shoulder. "Why did she fall down? Did I do something wrong?" Sophia held her tighter. She could not answer. Her mouth would not shape any of the words a mother is supposed to have, so she only rocked her, slowly, and pressed her lips to Emma's damp curls, and let her daughter believe for one more minute that grown-ups always knew what to say. Outside, far below the window, a second set of red lights spun through the estate gates and vanished into the dark. At Mount Sinai, the stretcher burst through the emergency doors, and a wall of nurses closed around it. Alessandro tried to follow. A hand touched his chest. Not hard, just firm. "Sir, you cannot come past this line. Please, let us work." The double doors swung shut in front of him. Through the small square of frosted glass set into each one, he could see moving shapes in green scrubs, a lifted arm, a hanging bag of something clear. He could not see her face. He stood there with his hands hanging at his sides and did not move. He had promised her, an hour ago, in front of 300 people, everything he had left to give. The glass between them was less than an inch thick. It felt like a country. He did not sit down. Nurses passed him in both directions, carrying charts, pushing carts, offering him plastic chairs he did not see. A young resident tried once to bring him a paper cup of water. It was still on the small table beside him hours later, untouched. The ice inside long since collapsed into itself. Alessandro Moretti stood exactly where the double doors had shut in front of him, his hands hanging at his sides, and then slowly rising, slowly closing into fists, so tight that the skin across his knuckles turned the color of bone. His jacket was still crumpled from the shape of Valentina's body against his chest in the ambulance. There was a small, dark stain on his shirt cuff that he had not noticed and would not have cared about if he had. Somewhere behind him, a wall clock moved through hours he could not have counted. At some point, a woman in green scrubs walked past him twice without stopping. The third time she came out through those doors, she stopped. She was the attending physician. Her name tag said Dr. Hayes. Her eyes had the specific dark tiredness that only belongs to people who have just spent a long time keeping someone else alive. "Mr. Moretti." He turned his head. He did not speak. "She is stable." "Doctor," Hayes said, and the words landed inside him like the first breath after being held underwater. "She is breathing on her own. The convulsions have stopped. We are keeping her sedated for the night to let her heart settle. She will live." For one moment his shoulders sagged forward, just barely, the only surrender his body would allow itself. Then the doctor's face did something else, and he saw it, and the moment ended. "There is something else you need to hear," she said. Her blood panel came back a few minutes ago. This was not an allergic reaction. This was not a bad reaction to alcohol. She was poisoned, Mr. Moretti. A heavy metal compound, not accidental. Somebody put it in what she drank. The corridor around them went very quiet. Alessandro did not move. His face did not change. But somewhere beneath the surface of him, in the deep place where the Moretti name had been made and remade for 4 generations, something old and patient sat up in the dark and began, slowly, to open its eyes. "How much?" he asked. "Enough to kill a man twice her size, if she had taken a second sip." He nodded, once, as if she had confirmed a weather report. "Thank you, doctor." His phone was already in his hand. He turned 2 steps down the corridor, away from the doors, and pressed a single name. Marco Ricci answered on the first ring. "Boss, every camera in the house," Alessandro said, in a voice so level it did not sound like anger at all, which was what made it terrible. "Every hallway, every kitchen, every service corridor, every angle of that ballroom from the moment the first bottle was opened. I want it pulled, copied, and on my desk before sunrise. Already in progress. Every person who worked that party, waiters, cooks, drivers, valet boys, florists, the band, every single one. Nobody leaves the grounds. Nobody goes home to their wife. Nobody makes a phone call. I have not approved. Names, faces, backgrounds, bank accounts. Anything moves in the last 6 months. I want to know about it." "Yes, sir. And Marco." "Yes. Whoever it is." Alessandro's voice dropped, very quiet, almost gentle. "Whoever poured that glass. Whoever handed it to her. Whoever paid them to do it. I do not care how deep they think they are hiding. I do not care whose name is behind them. Find them." He ended the call. He walked back to the doors of the recovery ward. Through the small square of frosted glass he could see her now, the shape of her in the bed, the slow, soft rise and fall of the ventilator lifting her chest. Her mouth was covered by a mask. Her hands lay open at her sides, palms upward, empty. Somebody in his house had put their hand into his life tonight and tried to take her from him, standing there in the fluorescent silence of the corridor, looking through an inch of hospital glass at the woman he had almost lost. Alessandro Moretti made a promise none of the 300 witnesses at his engagement had been present to hear. Somebody was going to answer for this. The security room of the Moretti estate had no windows. It sat on the ground floor at the end of a long service corridor, behind a steel door that required 2 keys and a code. Inside, one entire wall was a bank of monitors, 32 of them, each carrying a live feed from somewhere in the house or on the grounds. The room smelled of stale coffee and warm electronics, and the particular kind of sweat men produce when they have been staring at pixels for too many hours. Marco Ricci had been in that room since the ambulance left. He had taken off his jacket and rolled his sleeves to the elbow. 2 of his best technicians sat at the console beside him, their faces lit blue by the screens, their fingers moving between keyboards and mice with the practiced calm of surgeons. Every camera feed from the evening had been pulled, indexed, and cross-referenced against the guest list, the staff roster, and the timeline of the kitchens. 4 hours later, they had it. The clip they finally rendered ran 73 seconds. It had been stitched together from 6 different angles, cleaned up frame by frame, and set to play in a single continuous cut. Marco watched it once by himself. He did not say anything. He rewound it to the beginning and left it queued. Then he called upstairs, and he waited. Alessandro walked into the security room a little before dawn. His shirt was still the shirt he had worn to the engagement. The collar was open. There was gray in his face that had not been there yesterday. He did not greet anyone. He walked to the center chair in front of the largest monitor, and he sat down, and he set both his hands flat on the console in front of him. "Play it," he said. Marco reached across and pressed the key. The clip began in the auxiliary kitchen, the small service pantry that opened onto the ballroom through a set of swinging doors. A waiter uncorked a fresh bottle of champagne. He poured 3 flutes with careful, even hands. He set the 3 flutes on a small silver tray. Then he added a 4th glass, shorter and rounder, and filled it from a pitcher of apple juice. He wiped the tray, straightened the linen beneath it, and stepped back. The tray sat alone on the counter for 11 seconds. The angle changed. A figure in a black work dress and a white apron came into frame from the ballroom side. She was small, tired-looking, her hair pinned back. She said something to the waiter that the audio was not clean enough to catch. He nodded. She picked up the tray with both hands. She carried it out through the swinging doors. The angle changed again. Now it was the ballroom overhead camera, wide and clean, catching everything. Sophia Ricci crossed the marble floor with the tray. She did not stop. She did not speak to anyone. Nobody touched the tray or brushed against it or came within arm's length of the glasses. She reached the head table. She set the tray down. She stepped back 1 careful pace. The camera watched Valentina lift the flute on the right. The camera watched her drink. Alessandro did not move through any of it. When the clip ended, he did not ask to see it again. He sat forward slowly and rested his elbows on the console and pressed the heels of both hands against his eyes for a long moment. When he lowered them, his face had gone somewhere very far away. Marco spoke very quietly. "Boss, I am sorry." Alessandro did not answer at first. Then he said, "Her apartment. Now. Take 4 men. I want every drawer, every cupboard, every seam, of every mattress. If there is a nail loose in the floorboards, I want to know what is under it, sir." And Marco. He lifted his eyes to the monitor one last time, to the frozen final frame of a woman in a white apron, standing beside a table with her hands folded in front of her. "Do not let her know anything is happening. Not yet. I want to see what she looks like when she still thinks she is safe." Marco nodded. He was already reaching for his phone, 3 floors above them, in a small servant's bedroom with the door locked. A woman sat on the edge of a narrow bed. Her daughter had finally fallen asleep against her shoulder. 1 small fist curled around the ear of a stuffed rabbit. The woman rocked her, slowly, and hummed a song her own mother had once hummed to her, and she believed, with the whole quiet, stubborn heart of a person who has already survived too much, that whatever nightmare tonight had been, it would be over by morning. She had no way of knowing that 4 men in dark coats were already in a car, driving toward the small apartment above a laundromat where she and her daughter lived. She had no way of knowing that the nightmare had not even begun. The laundromat on the ground floor was already closed for the night. Its neon sign buzzed low above the sidewalk, throwing a pale blue light across the wet asphalt, where 3 black cars pulled up one after another, cut their engines, and let their doors open in near silence. 6 men stepped out. 4 of them climbed the narrow side stairs to the 2nd-floor landing. 2 stayed below to watch the street. The door to the apartment was not even locked properly, a cheap deadbolt. It gave under the 2nd man's shoulder without a sound. They stepped inside and the smell hit them first. Not the smell of a crime scene. The smell of a life. Warm laundry from the vent below, a trace of something that had been cooked earlier that evening, a soup with onions in it, the soft, faintly sweet scent of a small child. Marco Ricci was the last one in. He closed the door behind him and stood for a moment in the narrow entry, taking in the room. It broke something in him he had not expected. The apartment was one room, a kitchenette against the near wall, a folding table with 2 chairs, a single bed pushed against the far wall, with a smaller mattress on the floor beside it made up neatly with a child's blanket printed with white rabbits. A rolled sleeping mat stood in the corner beside a fan. There was no clutter anywhere, not because there was nothing to clutter with, because everything the two of them owned had a place, and it had been put in its place. The cracked phone on the folding table lay screened down beside a charger with tape wrapped around the frayed end. 2 worn shoes, a woman's, sat neatly toe-to-wall by the door beside a smaller pair with light-up soles that no longer lit. A coloring book on the table lay open to a half-finished page of a mermaid, the crayon still resting in the fold of the spine, where a child had set it down and expected to come back to it. Marco lifted the coloring book with 2 fingers, looked at the mermaid for 1 second longer than he meant to, and set it back down exactly where it had been. "Search everything," he said quietly, slowly. "Nothing gets missed and nothing gets damaged. Photograph before you move." They started with the kitchen. The drawer of the little laminate counter held a mismatched set of forks, a rubber-banded stack of coupons, and behind a chipped cardboard cylinder of cheap iodized salt, tucked so far to the back that a hand had to reach past everything else to find it, a small glass vial. The man who lifted it did so with a gloved hand and set it on the counter under the light. It was no bigger than his thumb. The liquid inside was clear, faintly straw-colored. He looked up at Marco. Marco stepped closer, bent down, and read the tiny handwritten label on the side. He did not need to send it to a lab to know. He took a photograph. They moved to the sleeping area. The bedside drawer of the single nightstand held a rosary, a pack of children's cough drops, a folded electric bill with a red stamp on it, and behind them, wedged upright against the back of the drawer, as if someone had jammed it there in a hurry, an old wooden picture frame. The man who pulled it out turned it over. There was a thick paper envelope taped to the back with 3 strips of masking tape. He peeled it free and slit the flap. Inside were bricks of $100 bills bundled with rubber bands. Marco did not need to count to guess the number. The men looked at each other. One of them turned the picture frame the right way around and set it face up on the nightstand under the lamp. The photograph inside stopped Marco in the middle of a breath. It was Sophia, younger, thinner, exhausted in the way only new mothers are exhausted. She was holding a newborn, so small the baby was mostly blanket, and she was smiling down at that blanket the way a woman smiles when there is nothing else in the world for her to look at. The two of them stood in front of a plain white wall. No father in the picture, no grandparents, no brothers or sisters, just a woman and her child, just the two of them, the most valuable thing in the room, and it had been the shield that hid the $50,000. Marco stood over it for a long moment. Then he lifted his phone and pressed a single name. Alessandro answered on the first ring. "Talk to me," Boss Marco said, and his voice was flat, careful, the voice of a man reporting facts he wished he did not have. "It is all here, every bit of it. Poison in the kitchen, cash behind a picture frame in the bedroom, 50,000, give or take. Photographs coming to you now." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Bring her to me," Alessandro said finally. "And bring the child. Do not let them see each other on the way." The line went dead. In the small, clean apartment above the laundromat, the men began, very carefully, to gather the evidence that would break 2 lives before sunrise. They came for her before the sun came up. Sophia was still sitting on the edge of the narrow bed in the servants' room, her back stiff, her daughter asleep with her small head in her lap, when the key turned in the lock from the outside. She had time only to lay Emma gently down against the pillow and to smooth the blanket over her shoulders before the door opened and 2 men in dark suits stepped inside. "Ma'am, you need to come with us." She looked at them. She looked at her sleeping child. She looked at them again. "My daughter. Someone will stay with her. Where are you taking me?" "Downstairs, ma'am." "That is all we can say." She got to her feet slowly. She was still wearing the black work dress and the white apron from the party. She smoothed the apron with both hands, the way a woman smooths a dress before an interview she has already lost. She bent and kissed Emma once on the forehead, a long, careful kiss, the kind mothers give when they are trying to leave a piece of themselves behind in case they do not come back soon. Then she followed the 2 men out. They put the handcuffs on her at the top of the servants' stairs. She did not resist. She did not even flinch. She only lifted her wrists and looked at the metal as it closed around them with a small mechanical click, and something inside her chest folded in on itself very quietly. Behind her, through the closed door of the small room she had just left, she heard her daughter wake up. She heard Emma call for her. She heard the small voice climb the octaves into a sob, and then into a scream, and a second guard opened the door and stepped inside, and the sound was cut off by the door closing again. Sophia did not turn her head. If she turned her head, she would not be able to walk down the stairs, and if she could not walk down the stairs, the two men would carry her, and she would not give Emma the memory of her mother being carried. She walked. Alessandro was waiting for her in his study. The room was lit only by the single lamp on his desk, a low amber pool of light that made the rest of the room a series of soft, dark shapes. The heavy curtains had been drawn. He was standing behind the desk with his back to her when she was brought in, looking at something on the polished wood in front of him. He did not turn until she was made to kneel on the rug. Then he turned, and she saw his face. She had never seen his face like that. "Signor Moretti," she began, and her voice broke on the first word. "I swear on my daughter's life, I did not do this. I did not do this. I do not know how those things came to be in my house. I do not know how he set 3 photographs down on the desk between them, one after the other, without a word. The vial from behind the salt, the envelope of $100 bills, a single frozen frame from the ballroom camera, time-stamped, of a small woman in a black work dress carrying a silver tray toward a smiling woman in a gold gown. The evidence is clear, Sophia," he said, and his voice was the quietest thing in the room. "The poison was in your kitchen. The cash was in your bedroom. The camera has you walking that glass into her hand. Tell me, what am I supposed to see when I look at this?" "I did not do it," she whispered. "I did not. Someone put those things there. Someone," her voice failed her. "I do not know. I do not know. I swear on Emma, on my mother, on everything I have ever loved. I did not do this." "Then explain it to me." She opened her mouth. She closed it. She opened it again. She could not. She had no answer. Not a plausible one. Not a comforting one. Not one a man with 3 photographs in front of him could accept. She hung her head, and the tears fell hot onto the rug between her knees, and she said, "I cannot explain it, but I did not do it." Alessandro looked at her for a long time. Then he turned to Marco, standing silent by the door. "The cellar," he said, "until I decide." Marco stepped forward to lift her. She did not fight. She did not speak. She only turned her head one last time toward the doorway, as if she could see through the ceiling to the small room 3 floors above, as if she could send something up those stairs that would reach her sleeping daughter and cover her against the cold. Then she was gone. The door closed behind her. Alessandro stood alone in the amber pool of lamplight for a long time. He did not sit. He did not move. He turned slowly toward the tall mirror above the low bookshelves on the far wall, and he looked at the shape of himself in the dark glass. He did not recognize the man looking back. Something rose in his throat then, a name he had not said aloud in almost 5 years, a name he had trained himself not to say. It came up on its own, as a breath, as a sigh, the way something long buried finally surfaces in the still hour before dawn. "Isabella," he whispered. The mirror did not answer. Nothing in the room did. The apartment above the laundromat did not sleep that morning. By the time the first pale gray light was seeping through the small kitchen window, Marco Ricci was back inside with a new team of 4 men, and this time the search was slower, more careful, more thorough. Alessandro had made himself very clear over the phone before dawn. Nothing was to be missed. Not 1 square inch of the small room, not 1 seam of 1 cushion, not 1 loose floor tile in the tiny bathroom. If Sophia Ricci had touched it, they were to find out. The men worked in gloves and did not speak much. One of them lifted the little folding table and checked the underside of it for anything taped to the wood. Another opened every book on the small shelf and shook it upside down. A third pulled the mattress off the bed frame and ran his hands along every stitched edge of the seams. Marco himself worked the kitchen, opening tins of powdered milk and coffee, sifting through them slowly with a butter knife. They found nothing new for almost 2 hours. Then the youngest of Marco's men, a quiet boy named Enzo who had only been with the family for 8 months, went to work on the corner where the child slept. The little mattress had already been searched. The blanket printed with white rabbits had been shaken out. What was left in that corner was a low plastic bin, painted a chipped robin's egg blue, where the child kept her toys. Enzo lifted the bin off the floor with both hands, set it aside on the mat, and knelt to feel along the floorboards where it had been sitting. His knuckle knocked against wood. The sound came back different from the sound the rest of the floor had been giving him all morning. It was not the dead thud of a board seated tight against its joists. It was a small, hollow tap, like knocking on a door. He looked up. "Signor Ricci." Marco crossed the room. He crouched beside the boy. He rapped his own knuckle against the same spot. It answered him the same way. He pulled a slim penknife from his inside pocket and slid the blade into the seam between two of the boards. The board lifted with almost no resistance. It had been cut short at both ends and set back into place so cleanly that a person walking over it would never have felt the difference. Beneath it, in the shallow space between the joists, sat a small carved wooden box. Marco lifted it out with both hands. It was no larger than a loaf of bread. The wood was dark, close-grained, and old, the surface soft with the fine polish that only decades of handling can give a thing. Someone had carved a delicate pattern of leaves and small birds around the edge of the lid, the work of a patient hand, done years ago. A single small brass padlock hung from the clasp, dulled almost green at the edges by time, but still solid, still closed. Marco turned the box over slowly in his palms. He did not force the lock. He did not even try. "Wrap it," he said. "Do not scratch it. This goes to him alone." 2 hours later, the box was on the polished desk in Alessandro Moretti's study, and Alessandro was sitting in the leather chair on the other side of it, looking at it, and not touching it. He had not slept. The morning sunlight was coming in through the tall windows now, laying a bright bar across the wood of the desk, catching the small brass lock, and lighting up the fine tracery of the carving. The birds looked almost alive in that light. The leaves seemed to move. He knew, in the way a man sometimes knows things without having any reason to know them, that whatever was inside this box was not going to be more evidence against the woman in his cellar. It was going to be something else, something that had been hidden for a very long time by hands that had loved what they were hiding. He did not want to open it. For a long moment he sat with both hands resting flat on the desk on either side of the box, breathing slowly, feeling the cold thin edge of something rise along his spine that he could not name. Some deep private instinct in him was telling him, very quietly, to stand up and walk out of the room and leave the box where it was. He did not stand up. He reached for the silver letter opener that lay across a small stack of correspondence at the corner of the desk. He waited in his hand for a second. Then he set the point of it against the small brass shackle of the padlock, braced the box with his other hand, and twisted. The lock gave with a small, tired click. He set the opener down. He lifted the lid. For half a heartbeat he did not look inside. He kept his eyes on the ceiling above the desk, breathing once, and only after that breath had gone all the way in and all the way out did he lower his gaze to what was in the box. He reached in. His fingers had begun to tremble by the time they closed around the edge of the first photograph. He drew the photograph out into the light. It was a small square print, 4 by 4, its edges softened by years of handling. The colors had faded the way the colors of a photograph always fade when someone has taken it out of a box many times to look at it. The whites had gone the color of old cream, the blues had gone soft. The sunlight in the picture, however, was still bright. 2 women stood on a beach. One of them was Sophia, not the pale, hollow-eyed woman kneeling in his cellar. A younger Sophia, maybe 22, 23, with color in her cheeks and her dark hair loose over her shoulders, and a laugh caught halfway across her open mouth. She was leaning sideways into the arm of the other woman, and her whole body was folded into that lean the way only a person leans into someone they have been leaning into their whole life. The other woman, Alessandro's hand went still on the photograph. He knew that face. He had known that face better than his own face for 2 years of his life. He had known the small, pale scar just above the left eyebrow, the one from a bicycle fall when she was 9. He had known the way the corners of that mouth turned up before the rest of the smile arrived. He had known the exact tilt of that jaw when she laughed with her whole chest, which she was doing in the picture, the way she had done 100 times sitting across from him at a small kitchen table in a small kitchen in a small apartment on the other side of the city. A lifetime ago. Isabella, who had left him. Isabella, who had walked out of his life 5 years ago without a note, without a phone call, without a word. Isabella, who had let him hear the news of her disappearance the way a stranger hears news, through other people, through silence, through the slow, terrible understanding that she was not coming back. Isabella, whom he had spent 1 full year hating, and 4 full years pretending he had stopped. Isabella, standing on a beach he had never seen, in a summer dress he had never bought her, laughing into the shoulder of a woman he now realized he had been walking past in his own house for almost 2 years. The floor of the study tilted, very slightly, under him. He did not hear the ticking of the tall clock in the corner anymore. He did not hear the birds in the garden outside the tall window. There was a fine, high sound in his ears that was not a sound, only the shape of a sound, and beneath it a slow, dark question forming that he could not yet put into a sentence. Why was Isabella in a box under the floor of the Maid he had almost destroyed last night? Why did Sophia have this picture at all? Why were they touching each other like sisters? Why? He set the photograph down on the desk very carefully, as if it might break if he set it down wrong, and he reached back into the box. Beneath where the photograph had been, folded neatly into a small square, sealed with a smear of dark red wax that had gone almost black with age, lay a single letter. He knew the handwriting on the front of it before his fingers touched it. He had once known every letter of that handwriting. He had once known the exact way she looped her small round L's, and how her T-crosses always leaned faintly upward, as if her hand were smiling as it wrote. The address on the front of the envelope, in that handwriting, was only 4 words. For Sophia, my beloved sister. Alessandro sat very still. He did not reach for the letter opener. He did not need it. The wax had already been broken once, a long time ago, and pressed carefully back into shape by someone who wanted the letter to look untouched to anyone who might find it. Sister. The word sat on the desk between him and the small folded square of paper, and it did not move, and it did not go away. He had never known Isabella had a sister. She had told him she had no family left. She had told him, more than once, that she was the last of her line. He set the box aside. He drew the letter out with both hands, as if it were a living thing. He laid it on the desk under the warm yellow light of the lamp. He lifted the flap slowly and unfolded the paper, one careful crease at a time, until it lay flat and open in front of him. The handwriting inside was the same handwriting he had once received on Sunday mornings, tucked into the pockets of coats she had folded, tucked under coffee cups she had rinsed, tucked into books he had left face down on nightstands. He drew in one long breath, the way a man draws in breath before going under water, and he began to read. To Sophia, my beloved sister, if you are reading these lines, then I no longer have enough time to speak to you with my own voice. I am sorry that once again I am placing everything on your shoulders. In the cradle beside you is Emma, my daughter, and the daughter of Alessandro Moretti. Please remember this for the rest of your life. No matter what happens, do not ever let Emma believe that her father abandoned us. Alessandro does not know of her existence. Sophia, you are the only person who knows the whole truth. The day the doctors told me that I was seriously ill and did not have much time left to live, I made the decision to leave Alessandro. It was not because I stopped loving him. It was because I loved him more than anything on this earth. I did not have the courage to let the man I loved watch me die a little more each day. I chose to let him hate me for the rest of his life, rather than let him suffer through my death. But fate was crueler than I imagined. Only after I left Alessandro did I realize I was carrying his child. So many times I wanted to return, to tell him the truth. But every time I thought about the world Alessandro lives in, I stopped. He is the head of a Mafia family. His daughter would surely become a target for countless enemies. If I brought Emma back, while I myself had so little time left, I did not know whether Alessandro could carry both losing me and protecting her alone. So I ask this of you. If one day I am no longer here, please raise Emma as if she were your own daughter, and tell Alessandro nothing. Only when you truly believe that he has become a father capable of loving Emma with his whole heart, that he can give her a peaceful home. And most importantly, that he is strong enough to protect her from every danger. Only then, take Emma to him and hand him this letter. If that day never comes, burn this letter and let Alessandro hate me for the rest of his life. I accept carrying this misunderstanding to my grave. Sophia, I know what I am asking of you is cruel. You will have to sacrifice your youth, your happiness, and your whole life to raise my child. I do not know how to repay you. I only hope that if one day Emma asks what kind of person her mother was, please tell her that her mother never abandoned her. Her mother only used her last remaining way to protect her. And if one day Alessandro holds Emma in his arms, please tell him that until the final breath of my life, I still loved only him. Your sister, Isabella. The letter shook once in his hands. Then it stopped shaking, because he had stopped breathing. He read the last line again. He read it a 3rd time. He read it a 4th time, as if by reading it enough times he could change what it said, or change what it meant, or change the 5 years of his life that now lay behind him like a country he had walked through blindfolded. She had not left him. She had not stopped loving him. She had not run to another man. She had not tired of him. She had not decided the Mafia son was too dark a thing to build her life around. She had been dying. She had been dying, and she had chosen to let him hate her, rather than let him hold her hand while it happened. And he had hated her. For 1 whole year, he had hated her with every muscle in his body. For 4 years after that, he had trained the hate down into something quieter, but he had never let it go, because the hate had been the only thing that made her leaving make sense, and if he let go of the hate he would have to face the possibility that he had misunderstood something enormous, and he had not been strong enough, in any of those 5 years, to face that possibility. He had a daughter. He had a 3-year-old daughter. He had watched her dance last night on the marble floor of his own ballroom in a cotton dress that did not fit her right, and he had not known. He had watched her carry a stuffed rabbit in the crook of her small arm, and he had not known. He had sat in his study 3 hours ago and ordered the woman raising her thrown into his own cellar in handcuffs. The sister of the woman he had loved, the woman who had spent 5 years keeping the last living piece of Isabella alive on a housekeeper's salary above a laundromat, the woman he had accused, on the strength of planted evidence, of trying to murder his fiancée. He was not going to cry. This pain was too big for crying. Crying was for pain a person still fit inside of. This was pain that had swallowed him whole. His knees gave. He went down onto the rug at the base of his own desk, still holding the letter, and he pressed both hands flat against his face, and for a long, long moment, he did not move at all. He did not make a sound. He only stayed there, folded in on himself under the warm yellow light of a study he had built with his own money in a house he had thought he understood. Then, all at once, he came back up. He stood so fast his chair went over behind him. He did not notice. He grabbed his coat off the back of the door in one motion and pulled it on as he moved. He did not close the box. He did not close the drawer. He did not close the door of his study behind him. He tore it open so hard the frame shuddered in the wall, and he was already running by the time his boots hit the marble of the hallway outside. He was running for the stairs to the cellar. The cellar door slammed against the stone wall so hard the sound went up the stairs behind him like a shot. The guard on duty came off his chair with his hand halfway to his sidearm before he saw who it was and froze. Alessandro did not look at him. He did not slow down. He walked past him and past the row of storerooms and past the wine racks and past the heavy iron door at the end of the corridor, and he did not stop until he was standing outside the small square cell they had put her in. He pulled the door open with his own hand. Sophia was sitting on the concrete floor in the corner, her knees drawn up to her chest, her wrists still cuffed in front of her, the white apron of the party dress still tied around her waist and now stained with the dust of the cellar floor. She had heard him coming. Her head was already lifted. Her eyes were red and swollen from a night of crying without any tears left in her. She saw his face. Then she saw the letter in his hand. She saw the faded red wax on the folded edge, and the small square of paper, and the handwriting on the outside, and her whole body went into a tremor she could not stop. It began in her shoulders and traveled down through her chest and reached her hands, and her hands began to shake so hard the metal of the cuffs made a small rattling sound against itself. "Sophia," he said. She broke. The sob came up out of her the way a wave breaks over a wall, all at once, uncontrollable. 5 years old. "She made me promise," she whispered. "She made me promise. I am so sorry. I am so sorry." He crossed the small cell in 2 steps and went down onto his knees in front of her, and she started talking then and could not stop, the words tumbling out of her one over the top of the next, as if she had been holding them behind her teeth for so long that the moment the door opened they would not obey her anymore. She was Isabella's little sister, younger by 6 years. They had lost their mother when she was 15, and Isabella had raised her single-handed after that, on waitress tips and factory shifts and long nights of homework at a kitchen table with a single lamp. She had loved her sister more than anything in the world. When Isabella had come to her that final winter with the diagnosis and the letter and the plan, she had begged her not to do it. She had begged her to tell him. Isabella had not listened. She had raised Emma alone for the 2 years after Isabella died. She had done it on the money from Isabella's small life insurance, and then, when that ran out, on her own hands. She had scrubbed offices at night. She had cleaned banks before sunrise. She had done anything that paid so that Emma would not have to know that her mother had left her anything less than a whole life. And then she had come here. She had come to the Moretti estate deliberately, quietly, using a false last name and a set of scrubbed references, because she needed to see him. She needed to know what kind of man Isabella's Alessandro had become in the years since he had lost her. If he was still cold, if he was still cruel, if he was still the man the newspapers wrote about, she was going to burn the letter and take that secret and Emma with her to another city and let him die never knowing. But she had watched him, quietly, for almost 2 years. She had watched him with Valentina. She had watched him choose a woman who actually loved him, who softened him, who was slowly turning the winter in him back into something a child could live inside. She had watched him yesterday in the ballroom kneel down inside himself the moment Emma had begun to dance. She had begun, in the last few months, to think about how she would tell him. She had begun to think about when. She had never in her life put anything in Valentina's glass. She had never taken a single dollar from any man to hurt any woman. She did not know where the vial in the kitchen had come from. She did not know where the $50,000 in the envelope had come from. She had never seen either of them before in her life. She swore it on her sister's soul. She swore it on Emma's life. She swore it on every prayer she had prayed at her mother's bedside 20 years ago. Alessandro had not spoken through any of it. When she was finished, when there were no more words left in her, he reached forward with hands that had gone almost steady again, and he lifted her wrists. He fitted the small key he had taken from the guard's belt into the cuffs. He turned it once. The metal opened. He set the cuffs on the floor beside them. He did not stand up. He stayed there in front of her on his knees on the cold concrete, and he took her small, trembling hands into his own large ones, and he held them. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The cellar was quiet. Somewhere above them, a heating pipe ticked in the wall. Sophia lifted her eyes at last. Her voice, when it came, was almost too soft to hear. "Alessandro, Emma is your daughter. She has Isabella's eyes." He closed his eyes for one heartbeat. Only one. Then he stood, slowly, the way an old man stands. He looked down at her. "Stay here a minute," he said. "There is someone I need to go and meet." He turned. He walked out of the cell. He walked down the corridor, past the guard who did not dare speak, and up the stairs, and across the marble hall, and up the great staircase toward the 3rd floor. His legs carried him. He was not entirely sure they belonged to him anymore. Each step landed under him without weight, without feeling, as if he were moving through a house made of glass and water. He was going to meet his daughter. The door of the small servant's bedroom was standing half open. The woman he had left there hours ago to watch the sleeping child had heard him coming down the corridor and had stepped out into the hallway with her head down and her hands folded, ready for whatever the boss of the house wanted next. He did not look at her. He stopped at the doorway. He set his palm against the frame and stood there for a moment, gathering himself, before he pushed the door the rest of the way open and stepped inside. Emma was awake. She was sitting up in the middle of the narrow bed with the blanket pooled around her waist, her stuffed rabbit crushed against her chest with both arms, her curls flattened on one side from sleep. Her cheeks were still tracked with the dry, salty roads where her tears had run down them hours ago. The room smelled faintly of the strawberry shampoo Sophia had washed her hair with the morning before, in a different life. She looked up when the door opened. She did not flinch at the sight of him. She did not shrink back against the headboard. She only watched him come in, her dark eyes wide and quiet, the way a child watches something she has been told about but has not yet met in person. Alessandro closed the door softly behind him. He crossed the small room without a sound. He sat down on the edge of the bed, a careful arm's length from her, so that he would not frighten her, and he set his hands flat on his own knees, and he opened his mouth to say something to his daughter for the first time in her life. His throat closed. Nothing came out. He tried again. He drew a breath. He said her name. It came out only as a rough shape of sound, half a whisper, half nothing at all. "Emma." She looked at him. She looked at his face. Then she did something he did not expect. She unwrapped one small hand from her rabbit, and she reached across the space between them, and she laid her palm, very softly, against his cheek. Her hand was warm. Her fingers were sticky in the way small children's fingers are always sticky, from some dinner she had eaten in another world before all of this had begun. She left her palm there for a long moment, patting his face once, gently, the way she had watched her mother pat other people to comfort them. "You are crying," she said, in the small, matter-of-fact voice of a person announcing weather, just like the man in the picture. He went still. She had seen his face before, somewhere in that small apartment above the laundromat, in some drawer or on some shelf. Sophia had kept a picture of him. Sophia had shown it to Emma. Sophia had told the child, in whatever careful and gentle way a woman tells a child such a thing, that this man in the picture was somehow important to her, that this face mattered, that this face should be remembered. The child had remembered. Something inside him that had held for the last 36 hours quietly gave way. He reached out slowly, both arms, giving her every chance to pull back. She did not pull back. She leaned into him instead. Exactly the way her mother had once leaned into him across a small kitchen table years ago. Exactly the way Sophia had leaned into Isabella in the beach photograph downstairs on his desk. Emma folded her small body against his chest as if she had always known this was where the shape of her would fit, and he closed both arms around her, and he lowered his face into her curls, and he felt for the first time in 3 years the small, warm weight of his own daughter breathing against him. He had missed 3 years of that weight, 3 birthdays, 3 winters, a first word, a first step, every laugh she had ever laughed. Every night she had cried without him in the room. He had been drinking wine and signing contracts, and hating a woman who had never betrayed him at all. He held her. She let herself be held. After a while, in the quiet, she spoke against his shirt. "Papa, Alessandro." He almost broke apart. "Yes, little one, the man with the tray," she said. He put drops in the pretty lady's cup. He went very still. He drew back from her, gently, only enough to look down into her face. "What did you say, sweetheart?" She looked up at him with her enormous, serious eyes. She said it again, patiently, the way children repeat themselves when they think adults have not been listening. "Uncle Victor." He put drops in the pretty lady's cup, from a little glass tube. When Mama turned around to get the napkins, Alessandro's blood went cold. "Uncle Victor," he said very quietly. "You mean Mr. Victor, the tall man, in the black coat?" Emma nodded solemnly. "The one who always smiles at me in the kitchen." He put the drops in the gold cup, the middle one. When Mama's back was turned, I thought maybe it was medicine for her. Her small face grew troubled. Was it medicine? She had seen it. She had seen all of it. She had been standing right there at the edge of the head table, holding her rabbit, watching the room the way a 3-year-old watches everything. And she had seen the entire poisoning from beginning to end. And in all of the last day and night, in all the searches and the interrogations and the video reviews and the questions and the accusations, no adult in this house had ever once knelt down and asked the little girl what she had seen. Alessandro rose from the bed. His face had gone completely still. Whatever had been trembling under the surface of it a minute ago was gone now, walled off, saved for a later hour. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet enough not to alarm the child. "Stay here, my brave girl, just for a few minutes. I will send someone to keep you company." He walked to the door. In the hallway, his phone was already in his hand. He pressed a single name. Marco Ricci picked up on the first ring. "Boss, bring Victor Lombardi to my study," Alessandro said. "Right now. Do not tell him why." Victor Lombardi walked into the study the way he had walked into that study every morning for 22 years. He wore the same neat black coat, and the same white gloves, and the same quiet, respectful posture. His hair, gone almost fully silver years ago, was combed back from a wide forehead that had grown slightly deeper lines every winter Alessandro had known him. He carried himself with the perfect stillness of an old servant who had learned, sometime in the last century, how to enter a room without disturbing the air in it. He had carried Alessandro on his shoulders through the gardens when Alessandro was 4 years old. He had knelt down and tied Alessandro's shoes for him before his father's funeral when Alessandro was 19. He had been the one, on the terrible night the elder Signor Moretti had died, to place his hand on the shoulder of the new head of the family and say, in a voice that did not shake, "The house is yours now, young sir. I will keep it standing while you learn to carry it." He stopped in the middle of the rug now, folded his gloved hands in front of him, and inclined his head. "You called for me, sir." Alessandro did not answer right away. He was standing behind his desk, both hands resting flat on the polished wood. The small wooden box was gone. The photograph was gone. The letter was gone. He had cleared the desk himself before Marco brought Victor up, because he did not want the old man to see any of it. Not yet. He wanted to see the face first. He wanted to see the face without any warning on it. He looked at Victor now for a long time. He looked at the small, pale scar on the back of the left hand, the one Victor had gotten pulling a boy out of a car wreck in the driveway 30 years ago, before that boy grew up to become the man Victor was now bowing to. He looked at the small silver medallion of St. Anthony on the fine chain that showed just above the top button of the coat, the medallion Victor's own mother had put around his neck when he was 7, and that he had never once taken off in the more than 60 years since. He looked at the eyes. The eyes were tired. The eyes were kind. The eyes were the same eyes that had looked at him across 1,000 mornings of coffee and 1,000 evenings of paperwork, the same eyes that had watched him grow from a boy who could not tie his own shoes into a man who could break another man's neck without changing his expression. "Victor," Alessandro said at last, quietly, "the little girl upstairs, Emma, she says she saw you last night, at the head table, before the toast." There was a pause, very small, almost nothing. Then Victor's face gathered itself into the mildly puzzled expression of a man who has been told something impossible. "The child? Sir?" His voice was gentle. His voice was patient. His voice was exactly the voice a man of his rank ought to use when correcting the misunderstanding of a superior he loves. She is a beautiful little thing. But she is 3 years old, if I am not mistaken. Perhaps she has confused what she saw. I did not go anywhere near the tray last night. I was standing at the far service door, in charge of the second wave of guests coming in from the garden. Marco can confirm my position. He offered a small, sad, apologetic smile. The smile of an old man who is sorry to have to disagree with the head of the house on any subject at all. Alessandro did not answer him. He looked at Marco. Marco nodded once. Marco walked out of the study. Victor stood in the middle of the rug and waited. His posture did not change. His breathing did not change. If there was anything at all going on behind the surface of his face, none of it came through. Upstairs, 4 floors up, in the small, tidy servants' quarters, where Victor Lombardi had lived for 2 decades, Marco's men moved through the room with the same quiet thoroughness they had used the night before in an apartment above a laundromat, drawer by drawer, shelf by shelf, the narrow bed, the old brown suitcase in the closet, the single-framed photograph of Victor's wife Marta and their little son Luca, sitting on the small wooden nightstand where their faces were the first thing Victor saw every morning. At the far end of the top shelf of the bookcase stood a small, worn hardcover in cracked leather binding. It was the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. Victor had been reading and rereading that book for 20 years. Alessandro had once seen him carry it in the pocket of his coat through an entire snowstorm on the way back from his mother's grave. The youngest of Marco's men, Enzo again, took the book down and shook it. Nothing fell out. He set it on the small desk and began to turn the pages one by one. Between page 147 and page 148, taped flat against the paper with a single small strip of clear medical tape, was a thin glass vial. The liquid inside was faintly straw-colored. They photographed it before they touched it. They lifted it out with a gloved hand. Enzo held it up to the light of the desk lamp and looked at it for a long moment before he closed his fist around it very gently and left the room. 10 minutes later, back downstairs in the study, Marco walked in through the door without knocking and set the vial on the polished wood of Alessandro's desk. It rolled 1/4 of an inch to the right and stopped. Victor Lombardi looked at it. For one whole heartbeat, his face did not change. Then the mildly puzzled expression fell off of it, the way a mask falls off when the string that has been holding it in place is cut. His mouth opened. No sound came out. His shoulders came down. His knees came down. He went to the rug slowly, heavily, both hands going up over his face, and his old shoulders began to shake, and the tall silver head of the man who had once carried Alessandro Moretti on his back through the summer gardens of this house bowed forward until his forehead almost touched the floor. Nobody in the room moved for a long time. The only sound was the small, ragged breath of an old man trying and failing to gather himself off the floor. His forehead was almost pressed to the rug. His white-gloved hands lay open, palms up, on either side of his silver head, as if he were surrendering something he had been carrying for so long he could no longer remember its weight. Then, at last, the words came. They came in pieces at first, broken things that did not quite belong to full sentences. But Alessandro did not interrupt him. He came around from behind the desk and sat down in the leather armchair across from where Victor was kneeling. And he waited, and he listened. The glass in Valentina's hand last night, Victor whispered, had not been meant for Valentina. It had been meant for Alessandro. He had picked out the middle flute, the one closest to the head of the table, the one he was certain the master of the house would lift when the toast came. He had done it in the 7 seconds. Sophia had turned her back to fetch a second cloth napkin, because a napkin at the head table had a fold he did not like the look of, and he had asked her, in the mild voice of an old butler, to please bring another. She had gone. He had leaned in over the tray. The small glass tube in his sleeve had been ready for weeks. 2 drops, that was all it took. He had smoothed the linen back into place and stepped away from the table before she came back with the napkin in her hand. He had not known Valentina would lift that glass first. He had not known she would raise it to a 3-year-old child. He had not known she would take a sip before Alessandro even reached for his own flute. When he had realized what was about to happen, he had opened his mouth to say something, anything, to stop her. His voice had not come. His body had not moved. All he had been able to do was watch her drink and step back into the shadow of the velvet curtain behind him, and hope. The vial in Sophia's kitchen, the envelope of cash behind the picture frame. He had put those there. He had let himself into the apartment above the laundromat that morning at 4 o'clock, while Sophia was still in the master's cellar, and while the child was still asleep in the servants' quarters upstairs. He knew the door. He knew the cheap lock. It had taken him 90 seconds. He had placed the vial behind the salt where a search team would find it easily. He had placed the money behind the frame where a search team would find it easily. He had known Marco. He had known how Marco worked. He had known that Marco would find both within the hour. He had needed someone else to hang for it. He had chosen Sophia because she was the one who had carried the tray. Because she was small and quiet and had no family and no lawyer and no name that anyone in this house would fight for. He said the last part with his forehead almost touching the rug. Then, before Alessandro could speak, Victor reached with a trembling gloved hand into the inside pocket of his black coat and drew out a small object and set it on the rug in front of him. A memory card, no larger than a fingernail. "Please," he said. His voice cracked. "Please, watch this. Before you do anything to me. Please." Marco stepped forward without a word. He picked up the memory card. He carried it to the small laptop on the corner of Alessandro's desk. He slid it in. He turned the screen so that both Alessandro and the old man on the floor could see it, and he pressed play. The video that opened on the screen was very short. Alessandro watched it in complete silence. When it ended, he did not ask Marco to play it again. He did not need to. He had seen enough. What he had seen was a woman in her 50s tied to a wooden chair in a bare concrete room, and a boy of maybe 7 tied to a similar chair beside her, and a gloved hand out of frame that lifted the boy's small right hand and pressed the edge of a very thin blade to the base of his little finger, and held it there, so that both the woman and the child would understand exactly what was being promised. The picture went black. A single line of white text appeared on the black screen. 1 month, Lombardi. 1 finger a day if you fail us. The screen went dark. Victor Lombardi did not lift his head off the rug. "Signor," he said, and his voice had gone almost to a whisper. "Marta and Luca were taken 3 weeks ago, from the market, in front of half of Little Italy. I have not been able to sleep since. I have not been able to look at my own reflection in a mirror since. Please, I am asking you as a man who has served your father. And now you, for more than half of my life, kill me. Please, but send someone for my wife, send someone for my son." He touched his forehead to the floor. "He is only 7. The old shoulders shook once, and then went still. Alessandro did not speak. He looked down at the top of that silver head for a long moment. He thought about a summer afternoon almost 30 years ago, when the head of the Moretti family had been a different man, and that different man's small son had been carried on those same shoulders through the gardens of this house, up and down every gravel path, all the way to the fountain and back, until the little boy had fallen asleep against the back of the tall silver-haired butler's neck, and the butler had carried him, still sleeping, up the stairs and put him to bed. He rose slowly from the leather chair. He crossed the small space between them. He knelt down on the rug in front of the old man. He reached out with one hand and set 2 fingers very gently beneath Victor Lombardi's chin, and he lifted the silver head up until the old man's wet, ruined eyes were looking straight into his own. "No," Alessandro said quietly. His voice was steady. His voice was low. His voice carried a promise that neither of them, in 22 years of loyalty, had ever needed to speak out loud before. "We are going to bring them home." The Moretti estate did not sleep that night. By the time the sun set behind the trees at the far end of the drive, every downstairs light in the main house was on and every side gate had a man posted at it. Marco Ricci moved through the ground floor of the mansion the way a conductor moves through the pit of an orchestra, quiet and constant, and one by one the black cars began to arrive. 30 of the family's most trusted men came in that evening, from Brooklyn and Queens and the small, quiet neighborhoods across the river where they lived under other names, and they filed in through the service entrance in 3s and 4s without speaking. In the long room at the back of the ground floor, they laid out the tools. Rifles were unwrapped from oilcloth and checked, sidearms were loaded and slid into shoulder holsters. Boxes of ammunition were opened, stacked, and distributed. Marco moved among them, assigning teams, drawing lines on a satellite map of a warehouse complex along the East River, marking 3 points of entry and 1 point of extraction. Victor Lombardi sat on a wooden chair in the corner of that same room with 2 men beside him. He had not been cuffed. Alessandro had refused. He had, however, been searched, quietly and completely, and there were 2 men at his shoulders who would not leave his shoulders until the night was over. His silver head was down. His hands rested folded on his knees. When Marco knelt in front of him with the satellite map and asked him, very calmly, to draw with a pencil the exact interior layout of the warehouse where Salvi was holding Marta and Luca, Victor took the pencil in a hand that had gone almost steady, and he drew. Alessandro stood watching him for a long moment. Then he turned and walked out of the room. He climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. The small servant's bedroom was quiet when he pushed the door open. The lamp on the little bedside table was on, low and warm. Emma was sitting cross-legged in the middle of the narrow bed, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Sophia was on the small chair beside the bed, still in the same black work dress, her hands folded loosely in her lap, watching over her the way she had watched over her for every night of the last 3 years. They both looked up when he came in. He crossed to the bed. He sat down on the edge of it. He did not know how to say what he had come up here to say, so he did not try. He only reached out and set one large hand very gently on top of his daughter's small head, and he let it stay there. Emma looked up at him. She looked at his face for a long time. Small children can read a room the way animals read a room, without knowing they are reading it. She saw the coat over his shoulders. She saw the shape of the holster under it. She saw the tightness at the corners of his mouth and the way his eyes did not quite settle on any one thing in the room. She was 3 years old. She understood almost nothing. She understood everything that mattered. "Papa," she said softly. He did not move. "Papa," she said again. And this time she reached one small hand up and set her fingers around his thumb and held onto it with the whole of her strength, which was not very much, and she looked up at him with her enormous, serious eyes. "Are you coming back?" The word "Papa." She had said it to him upstairs an hour ago, and it had almost undone him, but he had been able to convince himself for a little while that he had imagined it, that it had been half a word, half a name he had wanted so badly to hear that he had heard it whether or not it had been there. Now she said it again. Now there was no doubt. The most powerful man in New York bent forward on the edge of the narrow bed of a servant's room in his own house, and he pressed his lips to the small, warm crown of his daughter's head, and he closed his eyes. "Papa will always come back. Emma," he whispered against her hair. "Always." He held her a moment longer. Then he stood. Sophia had risen from the chair. She stood at the doorway now, one hand pressed to her chest. She did not speak as he came toward her. She only reached out and closed her small fingers around his wrist and held on to him for one long second, hard, the way a person holds onto a rope, and she looked up into his face with everything that Isabella had ever asked her to look for. "Bring them home," she said. "All of them, including yourself." He nodded once. He kissed the top of her head the way an older brother kisses a younger sister after too many years apart. Then he was gone down the corridor and down the stairs and out through the front doors of the great house. Below, on the wide gravel of the front drive, 7 black cars were already waiting, with their engines running low. The sky above the estate had gone the color of iron. There was no wind yet. There was that particular held-breath stillness in the air that a person only feels in the hour before a great storm, when the trees have gone quiet and the birds have all stopped singing and every living thing seems to be waiting for the first drop of rain. Alessandro Moretti got into the lead car. Marco Ricci slid into the driver's seat beside him. The passenger door of the second car opened, and Victor Lombardi was helped inside between his 2 guards, his silver head bowed, a set of laminated satellite maps on his lap. The 7 cars pulled away down the long drive in a slow, unhurried line, taillights burning red against the gathering dark. 3 floors up, at the tall window of a small servant's bedroom, a woman stood holding her little girl in her arms and watched them go. The storm broke over the East River just as the last of the black cars killed their headlights. The warehouse sat at the far end of a dead-end pier, a long, low structure of corrugated steel and broken windows, the paint on its sides eaten down to rust by 20 years of salt air. The rain began in fat single drops that struck the metal roof like coins. Then it came down harder. Then it came down in sheets. The Moretti men used the cover of it. They moved in 3 teams across the empty lot, keeping low, keeping quiet, and the 2 sentries Salvi had posted at the loading bay never even had the chance to lift their radios. The first shots came a minute later. The second-floor windows blew outward in a bright spray of glass. Muzzle flashes chewed the dark. The rain hissed on hot metal as men moved from cover to cover, calling to each other in short, flat words, and the beams of the Moretti car headlights cut through the drifting smoke in long white cones. Alessandro Moretti did not stay behind the cars. He moved through the front doors of the warehouse with Marco Ricci 1 step behind his right shoulder and Victor Lombardi 1 step behind his left, and inside the main floor was a wide-open space of shipping crates and hanging chains and iron catwalks, and every angle of it was already loud with fire. Victor took the lead once they were inside. His hands were shaking. He did not try to hide it, but his feet did not shake. He crossed the floor of that warehouse the way a man crosses his own kitchen in the dark, because Salvi had walked him through every inch of this building a week ago at gunpoint and made him memorize the routes as part of the deal. Down the long corridor along the west wall, left at the second junction, past a metal door with a stenciled number 7 on it, down the short set of concrete steps into the sublevel. all the way to the far end, where a single steel door with a heavy bolt across it stood locked at the end of the passage. Marco cut the bolt. The door swung inward. The small room on the other side was concrete on every side, lit by a single, naked bulb hanging from a wire. 2 chairs stood in the middle of the floor. Tied to the chairs, blindfolded, gagged with cloth, were a woman in a stained gray dress and a small boy in a blue sweater. Marta Lombardi's head came up at the sound of the door. Little Luca made a small, muffled sound against the cloth in his mouth and began to strain against the ropes. Victor took 1 step forward. "Marta," he said hoarsely. "Marta, it's me. It's me. I am here, my love. I am here, my son. I am here." 2 Moretti men moved past him to cut the ropes. That was when the second door at the back of the small concrete room, the one nobody had noticed in the dim light, opened behind them. Dominic Salvi stepped through it with a pistol already raised. The barrel was pointed straight at the small blindfolded head of a 7-year-old boy. Victor did not think. He did not draw his own weapon. He did not shout a warning. There was no time for either. He crossed the space between himself and his son in a single dive, his silver head down and his old arms already spreading wide, and he put his body between the gun and the child before anyone else in the room had time to move. The 3 shots came almost as one sound. Marta screamed a sound that had no shape to it, only volume. Only the raw, open sound of a mother whose voice had gone through her own ribcage. Victor Lombardi's body jerked once, twice, 3 times against his boy's small chair, and then he sagged forward with his arms still spread around it, and the front of his coat began to darken very quickly in the low light. The Moretti guns answered. Alessandro was already moving before the 3rd shot had finished echoing off the walls. He crossed the concrete floor in 3 strides. He did not slow down. He did not stop. Dominic Salvi tried to raise the pistol a 2nd time. He did not manage it. What passed between the 2 men in that concrete room, in that particular narrow corridor of seconds, would never be spoken of afterward by any of the men present. There was a movement. There was a sound. There was a moment in which the head of the Moretti family looked into the eyes of the man who had held a blade against the finger of a 7-year-old boy in the corner of a video, and there was a moment after that in which one of those 2 men was still standing. The medics ran in through the doorway a heartbeat later, sliding on the wet concrete, kits already open in their hands. Marta had thrown herself off the chair somehow, and was on the floor beside her husband, her hands pressed against his coat where the darkness was spreading fastest. Her mouth still shaping his name over and over, no sound coming out. Little Luca had gotten the blindfold half off his own face. He saw his father lying there. He crawled to him on his knees across the concrete, and he put both small arms around the old silver head, and he began to cry, the specific cry a small child cries when the person they trust most in the world does not answer them. Alessandro was already on the floor beside them. He set his hand on Victor's chest to feel for a heartbeat. It was there. Faint, fast, still there. He did not wait for the medics to reach a stretcher. He lifted the old man in his own arms, the way that old man had once lifted a small boy on a summer afternoon in a garden, and he carried him out of that concrete room, and back up the concrete steps, and down the long corridor, and out through the shattered front doors of the warehouse. Behind him the fighting had gone quiet. Ahead of him the storm was breaking apart. The rain had thinned to a fine gray drizzle. Beyond the rooftops, over the far edge of the river, the first colorless line of dawn was beginning to lift. He crossed the wet asphalt to the nearest black car, with Victor cradled against his chest, and his own white shirt already soaked through red, and behind him, in the mouth of the warehouse, a small blindfolded boy in a blue sweater sat on the ground with his mother's arms around him, sobbing into her shoulder while she rocked him, and the pale gray light of morning came slowly down the pier to find them. The surgery on Victor Lombardi lasted 9 hours. 2 of the 3 bullets had struck him in the shoulder and the upper chest. The 3rd had passed clean through his side. The surgical team came out of the operating room a little after 2 in the afternoon in wrinkled green scrubs, and the tall lead surgeon told the small silent gathering in the waiting room that the old man had survived because he had been almost impossibly stubborn about it. He would need weeks, he would probably need months, but he would live. Marta Lombardi sat down when she heard those words, very slowly, as if her body had forgotten how to hold itself up. Her son climbed into her lap without a word and pressed his small face into her neck and did not speak for a long time. The Moretti family moved them both into a private room next to Victor's before the sun had gone down. For the next several days, that room was the quietest room in the hospital. Marta sat in the chair beside her husband's bed with her hand on top of his hand, the way she had put her hand on top of his hand every night at their small dinner table for 31 years. Little Luca lay curled against his father's good side on top of the blanket, one small fist knotted in the sleeve of the hospital gown, and slept the deep, bottomless sleep of a child who has finally been given permission to rest. The Moretti doctors came in and out, and adjusted lines and checked monitors and spoke in low voices, and neither the woman nor the boy took their eyes off the old silver head on the pillow for very long. On the fourth morning, Victor opened his eyes. He did not have the strength to sit up. He tried, weakly, to move his shoulders and his head off the pillow, and Marta pressed both her hands to his chest and told him no, and he stopped trying. He looked from his wife to his sleeping son curled against his side, and his old, tired mouth trembled once, and he closed his eyes again. Alessandro was already in the doorway. He came into the room quietly and pulled a chair up to the side of the bed opposite Marta. Victor did not open his eyes right away. When he did, he saw the master of the house sitting there, and he tried, very feebly, to lift his head off the pillow and lower it in some sort of bow. And Alessandro reached out with a hand still marked at the knuckles from a warehouse floor, and set that hand gently on the old man's shoulder to keep him where he was. "Signor," Victor whispered, I owe you my life. You do not owe me anything, Victor. Let me serve, please, to my last breath. Let me serve the Moretti house." Alessandro shook his head once, slowly. "You have already paid, old friend," he said. "In blood, in more than blood. Your debt is closed, all of it. From now on you will do only one thing for me." He tightened his hand very slightly on the thin shoulder under the sheet. "You will live. That is the only order I will ever give you again." Victor closed his eyes. A tear slid out from the corner of his left eye and disappeared into the silver of his hair. Marta reached across the bed and covered Alessandro's hand with her own. She did not speak. She did not need to. Alessandro sat with them a while longer. Then he rose, kissed the top of little Luca's head where the boy still slept, curled against his father, and walked out into the corridor. 2 floors up, at the far end of the west wing, in a bright, quiet room with a wide window overlooking the park, Valentina Romano had been awake for 2 days. She was sitting up in bed with a blanket over her knees when he came in. Her face was thinner. Her lips were still faintly bruised from the ventilator. She had brushed her own hair that morning, carefully, one slow section at a time. She looked up when he came through the door, and she smiled at him. The small, tired, real smile of a woman who had almost died and was still deciding what it meant to be alive. He pulled the chair up to the side of her bed, and he sat down and he took her hand. He told her everything. He told her about a beach photograph and a wooden box and a letter with a broken red wax seal. He told her about a woman named Isabella who had walked out of his life 5 years ago, and about the sister she had left behind to raise a child in a small, clean apartment above a laundromat. He told her about a 3-year-old girl with her mother's eyes who called him Papa. He told her about a butler who had carried him on his shoulders when he was a boy, and about a rival named Dominic Salvi who had taken that butler's wife and son to break him, and about a concrete room and 3 bullets in a warehouse in the rain. He left nothing out. Valentina did not interrupt him. When he stopped speaking, she looked at him for a long time, without moving, and 2 long, slow tears slipped down her cheeks and fell into the blanket on her knees. She was not angry. She was not jealous. Whatever the last 2 days in this bright, quiet room had done to her, it had done its work well. "Alessandro," she said softly, "can I meet her?" He nodded. He went to the door and spoke to the nurse. 10 minutes later, Sophia appeared at the doorway of the room, holding Emma by the hand. Emma had her stuffed rabbit in her other arm. She looked up at the tall, pale, beautiful woman in the hospital bed, and her small face lit up because she remembered that face. She remembered the gold gown and the arms that had lifted her on the marble floor. She remembered the smile. Valentina opened her arms. Emma let go of Sophia's hand and walked across the room and climbed straight up onto the bed and into that embrace, as if she had done it 100 times before. Valentina folded both arms around the little girl and pressed her lips into the top of Emma's curls, and she said, very softly, against her hair, "You are the most beautiful dancer I have ever seen in my whole life." Sophia stood in the doorway with both hands pressed to her chest. She did not step into the room. She did not want to disturb the shape of what was in it. She only stood there and watched the 3 of them, the man she had watched for 2 years, and the woman she had almost destroyed, and the child she had raised as her own, holding one another in a hospital room 3 floors above a butler who was still alive, and she let herself cry, silently, in gratitude. A quiet morning came a few weeks later on a small green hill outside the city. Alessandro drove the 2 of them himself. Emma sat in the back seat with her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin, and her small face pressed against the window, watching the trees go by. Sophia sat in the passenger seat with a bunch of wildflowers on her lap, the kind Isabella had once picked at the edges of fields when they were girls. The cemetery lay at the top of the hill under an open sky. It was a simple place. White stones, old trees, the kind of place a woman like Isabella would have chosen for herself if anyone had asked her. Her grave was a plain block of white marble at the end of the third row. Alessandro knelt down in front of it and laid the wildflowers against the base. He rested one hand flat against the cool stone and did not speak for a long time. When he did speak, his voice was low, meant only for the person whose name was carved above his hand. "You were right," he said. "I did grow into a better man. It only took me 5 years and a nightmare to see it." He drew a slow breath. "Thank you for Emma. Thank you for loving me enough to choose the harder road for yourself. I am sorry I did not know. I am sorry I hated you. I will spend the rest of my life making sure our daughter never has to." Emma had walked up behind him without a sound. She looked at the white stone. She looked at the letters of a name she could not yet read. Then she stepped forward and set her stuffed rabbit very carefully on top of the marble, tucked into the small hollow where the flowers lay, and she pressed her small hand once against the stone the way her mother had once patted her cheek. "For you, Mama," she whispered. Sophia turned her face away and covered her mouth. A soft wind moved through the trees just then, lifting one small leaf off the top of the stone and sending it spinning gently down the hill, and it felt, to all three of them standing there, like a quiet nod from someone who had finally been allowed to rest. Spring came slowly to the Moretti estate that year. The wedding was held in the garden on a warm afternoon in April, under an arch of pale white roses and green branches. It was a small ceremony. Only the people who had earned the right to be there. Victor Lombardi sat in a chair in the front row with his color returned to his face, and his wife Marta beside him, and little Luca leaning against his shoulder. Marco Ricci stood at the back with his hands folded, watching the aisle. Sophia sat in the front row with tears already on her cheeks before the music even began. On the small altar table, in a simple wooden frame under a single lit candle, Isabella's photograph looked out over the garden with her old summer smile. When the music started, Emma walked up the flower-strewn path between them, her small hand tucked into Alessandro's on one side and Valentina's on the other. She was wearing a soft white dress this time, made for her, sewn by hands that had measured her carefully. Her feet were bare. Her stuffed rabbit had been left at home on a shelf in her new bedroom because she had said, very seriously, that she did not need to carry him anymore. He would be waiting. After the vows, when the music turned to something slow and lovely, Emma slipped out from between them and walked to the small dance floor at the center of the garden. She closed her eyes. She lifted her small arms toward the pale spring sky. She danced the same dance she had danced on the marble that night. This time, none of the 300 guests laughed. This time, they wept. Alessandro pulled Valentina close, kissed the top of her head, and watched his daughter through eyes that no longer needed to hide anything. And he thought quietly to himself, "Some loves never leave. They only wait for the right moment to become family." Dear friend, wherever you are watching this from tonight, thank you for staying with this story all the way to the end. If there is one small truth this story has tried to carry, it may be this. The truth is patient. It will wait, sometimes for years, sometimes for a lifetime, for the moment when love finally becomes strong enough to hold it. And the people who once seemed lost to us are almost never as lost as we believe. Sometimes they have only been trying, in their own quiet way, to protect us. Is there a truth in your own life that is still waiting to be spoken? Is there someone you once misunderstood, someone you have been carrying anger toward, that you might be ready to see with softer eyes tonight? We would love to hear you. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Every single one is read, and every single story shared here matters to us. If this story touched something in your heart, please take a moment to like this video, and if you have not yet, subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you will not miss the next story we share. Every subscribe, every like, every share helps this little channel keep telling stories of the human heart. From all of us here, we wish you good health, peace in your home, and gentle days ahead. Take care of the people you love. Say the words while you can. Thank you for being here tonight. We will see you in the next story.